This has to be one of the prettiest VAC case tractors. Unfortunately, we had to push it in here because of a carburetor failure. On this one, the choke arm here that's connected to the shaft broke off. Whether that is a fault on your carburetor, or if you always have to run your tractor with the choke pulled halfway out, or if it's been setting with bad gas in it for a while, whatever the reason is and you want to rebuild your carburetor, this video is for you. I'm going to put a comprehensive kit inside this carburetor, and I'll show you where every single piece in that kit goes. My goal is that at the end of this video, you'll have the confidence to rebuild your very own carburetor on your VA series case tractor. So follow along with me. When you are ready to rebuild your own carburetor, you're going to need a carburetor kit. We offer 5 different levels of kits for these VA series case carburetors. So you will need to choose which grade of kit you want. This is the comprehensive kit, and that's the kit that I'm putting in the carburetor today. This is the most amount of pieces possible for the kit. This is a very popular choice, and then this economy kit to my left is also a really popular choice. So the comprehensive is like the most expensive. The economy is the least expensive, except for a gasket set. So economy is just gaskets, needle and seat, and a new idle screw, or idle needle, I should say. There's 2 other kits in the middle. We call them basic and complete, and they're just mid-grade levels, and you can look at our website and see pictures of all the pieces that are included in each kit and make a choice for what you want to have. We do offer different pieces that are sold separately, like the float doesn't come in a kit. We also sell a new sediment bowl assembly or a gasket and screen if you want to update that while you're at it. And this fuel elbow with the strainer on the back is also an individual purchase. You may want to consider replacing your air cleaner hose. This is the old one. I'm going to try to show you how stiff it is. So it's really hard to put that back on. A new one is pliable like this, and it's easy to slide right back onto the carburetor. These are cheap, and it's a good idea to just add them with your purchase when you purchase the carburetor kit. Lastly, if you don't already own a manual for your tractor, you can purchase one as well. The carburetor is of course covered in this manual, but it also covers the engine, the hydraulics, the clutch, the PTO, any of those major components that you might want to repair on your tractor while you own it. This does cover the VAC as well as other popular case models like the LA, the DC, etc. are all covered in one book. So it's a great resource to have if you don't already own it. All of these parts in the manual are available on my website, which is farmtractorrepair.com. I realize that you can purchase carburetor kits a lot of different places, but if purchase on my site helps to fund future tractor tutorials. Once you remove the carburetor from your tractor, you can begin to disassemble it. So I like to start by taking off this main adjustment needle. It's a pretty long needle, and it drops down into the bottom half of the carburetor, so you should take it out before you take your 2 halves of the carburetor apart. Be sure to remove the spring that comes with it, and most of the time there will be a small gasket underneath there too, so look for the gasket in case you want to remove it. On this carburetor, there are just 4 screws around the perimeter, so you can just simply unscrew those, and that's going to take the 2 halves of our carburetor apart. These screws do have little washers underneath them. If you purchase a comprehensive kit, then you're going to get new screws for the perimeter. But if you purchase anything less than that, like economy, basic, or complete, keep track of those screws because you're going to have to reuse them. They aren't included in a new kit. Got a couple more screws, and then we'll have the 2 halves pulled apart. Once I turn it this way, I want to show you that there is an identification tag on the carburetor right here. You need to look for that ID tag on your carburetor because that's going to help you get the right kit. Once you get into like a complete or comprehensive level kit, there are little differences in the carburetor that really matter. So look for that ID tag. Mine says TSX 114, which is a really common one for VAC, or all VA series case tractors, I should say, but you should check yours to be sure. When you pull it apart, you're being gentle in case you want to reuse your float. Mine looks corroded, although it probably does do float, because since it's so cheap, I'm going to replace mine. But if you want to reuse yours, keep track of it so that you don't damage it when you pull it apart. Inside here, there's also a venturi, and sometimes that'll come off with the top half, sometimes it'll stay in the bottom half. It doesn't really matter. Just keep track of this. This is not available as a replacement part, so do not lose your venturi. Let's go ahead and take a look at the top half first. So this float is held in place by a little pin, and then the float comes out and the needle is underneath it. Then your face gasket will pull off. Sometimes those will be stuck on there, so you might have to scrape it off a little bit. Up here near the throttle, you'll have 2 screws that hold this plate onto the shaft. But you can pull that off as well if you're going with a higher level kit. Let me see if I loosen those up enough. I got one out, the other one's still holding on just a little bit, so let me get that off. There we go. Then this door will just pull right out. There we go. Sometimes you have to use pliers to get that, but that was loose. And then the throttle shaft just pulls right out to the side. I'm gonna set that aside for now. Underneath here, we call this the fuel elbow. For this size fuel elbow, a 9/16 wrench will slide right over top of it like this, and then you can screw it right out. Notice how I have the wrench affixed onto the elbow. I just want to be careful not to damage my elbow. If you do damage yours, you can buy a replacement though. Underneath here is a screen. Make sure that the screen comes out and doesn't get stuck in there, because when you put a new one in, you don't want to have that new screen be a hindrance for you. Lots of times those are really gummed up. This one looks fairly new, but you want to pull that out of there. This piece is called the seat, and it will be important for you to remove yours so that you can put a new seat in, and a needle. The needle drops inside of it. I like to use a scraper like this since it will reach all the way across the groove in the top of the seat. Regular screwdrivers just don't seem to do the trick because you can't get across both slots on either side. Let me see. Nope. I thought I had it all the way. There's a small gasket underneath here, so I'll be sure to remove the old gasket as well as the seat once it's loose here. There we go. It's going to come, and the gasket is off of there as well. I'm going to move those aside. I'm going to flip this around, and right here we have the idle needle for the carburetor. This pulls out the same way that the main needle did. It's just easy with a screwdriver. There's a spring behind it. So I'll take that out, and then on the other side of this we have the idle jet. This idle jet appears to be in really bad shape. When I try to put a screwdriver on it, I can see that it's really sloppy inside there, and I can't get a good grip on it. So rather than continuing to try to remove the idle jet, and because I know that this tractor idled perfectly beforehand, I am choosing to leave my idle jet as is. If yours will come out, put a screwdriver on there and pull it out by all means. And make sure that you purchase a kit that gives you a new idle jet, and you can definitely replace it. But in this instant, I'm going to use my discretion and leave it as is. I'm just going to clean it. I'm going to use a can of carb cleaner to spray through here. I'm just going to make sure that that idle circuit is cleared. If it wasn't clear, I could even take a small piece of wire and run it through there as a way to clean it as well if the carb cleaner doesn't do the trick. I'm going to spray it through here where I took that idle needle out, and it comes out clear all the way through there, which is satisfactory to me. You can do that same test and make sure that your idle circuit is clear. Even if you put a new jet in, you can still make sure that it's clean. On the top here, you do see that I have an old gasket that is remaining, so I can use a scraper blade like this to try to remove it. And then once I have that off, I like to use a whizzy wheel like this to finish cleaning up the surface with the air hose on the end of it. Make sure that all the remains of my old gasket are removed, clean it up, and then the top half of my carburetor is ready for new parts. In the bottom half of the carburetor, you can start by removing this piece. Some people call it the emulsion tube, some people call it the nozzle. Either way, we're talking about the same part here, and you can use a deep well socket like I have, and that'll loosen up, and then it will just screw the rest of the way out. Sometimes the end part of this will be broken off, so we'll see what this looks like. So far it feels good. Yeah, there we go. Notice there's a little gasket that comes out with it. Next, I'm going to flip the carburetor over. In the bottom here, we have this plug, which I'm going to try to remove. If you can get this plug out, it's a good way to be able to clean all of your passageways. So that would be the reason why you'd want to take that out. I'm going to set that aside. And then here, we have the bottom drain plug. Let's see if that'll loosen up too. There we go. So I'm using a 1/2-inch wrench there, and that'll actually just come the rest of the way by hand. That's it for the bottom. Now we'll talk about the choke shaft. So if I turn this to up position so that the plate is now flat, you can see inside there that there are 2 screws that are holding the plate onto the choke shaft. So you can just use a screwdriver to pull those off. They come off the same way that you pulled off the throttle shaft screws. However, the door is a little bit different. So let me get one. Well, I thought I had that loose. I do. Let me get the other one loose and I'll show you. This door has a spring on it and a flap. It's much more involved than the top throttle door. Okay, this is almost coming off. Notice when you take yours off that you do get some little lock washers behind those screws. And if you aren't getting a kit that has new screws for your choke shaft, you want to keep track of them and not lose those little washers in addition to the screw. Man, this last one is just being a little booger. That's the part of the choke shaft that was broken. Remember how I mentioned at the beginning of the video that it was broken? That was it. Okay, so now I'm going to try to turn this aside, and I have a pair of needle nose pliers here. So I'm turning this so that the door is going to face straight up. And I'm so close. There it comes. Okay, there's the door. We'll of course put a new one on later. So with that removed, then the choke shaft will just pull right out the edge. Should, there we go. That choke shaft is in a really sorry state. We'll put a new one in for sure, and that'll make this operate a lot better. This contraption here that holds the rod into place, or that cable into place, I'm gonna leave as is. A new one doesn't come in the kit. Mine's in perfect shape, so I'm just gonna leave it how it is. My next step is to clean this up. So I'm gonna use my can of carb cleaner again. I'm gonna go through every single passageway from the bottom, from the top. I'm gonna spray it with carb cleaner, follow with the blow-off nozzle, and then spray it with carb cleaner and compressed air a second time. I'm going to do that very thoroughly, and then we'll be ready to come back and reassemble. I think the hardest part of this carburetor is this choke shaft and door, so I do it first to get it done with and out of the way. If you're watching this video, if you think you can handle this portion, then you're golden. So this choke shaft has a slit in it, and this door is kind of two-part. I'm going to show you how it assembles outside of the carburetor. If I put it inside there, you'd never see what I'm doing. So I'm just going to show you outside here. See how the solid part of the plate slides through the shaft, and then this bump that's on the door is where the shaft slides through. So you slide it through, and then you tighten this up by putting your two screws through. And that's what has to be accomplished inside the carburetor here. So I'm going to take that off, and I'm going to set my choke shaft through here. And then you can see in here, you can watch it move back and forth so that you can see the slot. And then you slide this around. When it ends up, you want it to be like this. So think about how your orientation needs to be. Move this around. And then slide it in there, right through the slot. This is gonna take me a couple minutes. I probably won't show the whole process on camera. You'll be sitting there watching your video for forever. Me just doing this, getting it in there. But you get the idea since I showed you outside of the carburetor. Work your door onto your choke shaft, tighten it up with the two screws, and then we'll proceed on. I got the door on. I would imagine that it'll probably take you maybe 2 to 3 minutes of fussing with it, so don't get discouraged if you feel like you're working at it for a while. Even someone who's done it many times, it still can be something you gotta really finesse into place. Once you have that as it should be, then you can put the rest of your choke shaft and connections together. I put the screw into here, and then there's this little clip that just wraps around here. Oops. I thought I could slide that on by hand. Maybe I have to have pliers. I should be able to. There we go. Okay, so then that will be in place and ready for when we go to reattach it to the tractor. The next step will be the emulsion tube. There's a thin gasket that drops underneath it, so make sure you have that gasket in place, and then just drop it down in there. Start this by hand. Make sure that you get a really good start on it by hand. And then once you have it screwed in most of the way, you can snug it up with a socket. Do be careful though, because this is hollow. You do not want to over tighten this piece at all. It'll snap right off. So be gentle with it. You want it tight, but not overly tight. And then just when it's snug, go ahead and release, take your tool off and be done. That's good for the emulsion tube and the choke shaft. Next, we can go down to the bottom. Now that I have my emulsion tube into place, I'm careful to hold the carburetor when I flip it over, since that sticks out of the bottom. I don't want to set it onto my table and break it off. In the bottom here, you have two choices. This would be the solid plug, and this would be a more suitable drain. You can choose whichever one you want if you went with a comprehensive kit, and go ahead and put that back into the bottom of your carburetor, and then be sure to replace that small plug as well. For your throttle shaft, you should put in a new seal. In your kit, you get both a rubber and a felt seal. You can choose whichever you prefer. I think the felt seal might be a little easier to put in, but I like the idea and concept of the rubber seal, so that's what I'm going to use. Notice that there's a groove on it here, and this groove goes up towards the top. Turn that so you can see it. And then the brass follows, and it sets in there like this. So once you have that lined up, and very carefully lined up, then you can use a socket that's the right size. See how this socket just rests right on top of there? I'm going to cover it with my hand here so I stay straight, but then I'm going to gently tap this into place. I'm not giving this a hard whack with all my strength. I'm just ever so slightly tapping that in because I don't want to overly smash it. It's brass, it's very gentle. So in those taps, all I did was get the rubber in there. So let me try to line that up into the groove, get it just so. I'm going to try to get the brass in there. There we go. Okay, there we go. I have the brass and the rubber lined up. So with that, then the throttle shaft will be ready to go in. There is a couple pieces that I took off the old throttle shaft here. This is how the throttle rod from the tractor connects on, and you have to slide that on the top here. So you put the washer and the nut on this side and slide that on. And then once I tighten that up, the throttle shaft will be ready to go in. Make sure I can get that started. There we go. Okay, I got that tightened up. So now my throttle shaft is ready to go into the carburetor. You can see that I have my stop screw installed as well. So that's ready to just go right through. Sometimes the first time you push it through after you put a new packing on there, it can be a little tight like mine, but you should push it all the way through, make sure that it moves back and forth freely as mine does, and you'll be good. The next step is to put this plate in. There will be a number on your plate, and the number side goes up towards the top. We're gonna see the number. So let me set that on there and just wiggle that around ever so slightly until you get your holes lined up for the screws. And then these itty bitty screws, they have a washer on the back, will tighten this up. So let me turn this towards you so you can see that I'm moving that plate until my screws are lined up, where my screw holes are lined up, just like that. Looks good from this perspective, we'll see. Okay, I've got that lined up perfectly. Let me see if I can just get a small screwdriver on there. Start it. There we go. Well, maybe not. I thought I had it. It's acting like it. Yes. Okay, got that one. I'm not going to tighten it up until I get the second one on there because that will allow me to make little adjustments if I need to slide that plate at all, but this looks like it's lined up perfect. So let me get that on there. And you can do the same. Tighten both of those up. Then once you have those tight, that'll be suitable for your door. The next step is over here at the idle stop screw. So you want to tighten this down. It's going to touch this peg here, and you want to tighten it all the way until this door just starts to crack right there. You're going to watch it as you tighten up the screw, and once you see a little variation on that door, I mean the ever so slightest amount of variation, is when you stop. So we're getting close here. And there it is. I just saw that crack. You can see there's just a little bit of movement right there where I can put my screwdriver through. That's where you want to leave your idle adjustment, idle stop screw for that. So with that, everything is set for our throttle shaft. The next piece to put in is this piece called the seat. It does have a little gasket on the back. This just drops in, and you can start this by hand and screw it down as far as you can. Sometimes these are a little harder to screw in. So I'm going to go back to using that scraper that I used before, and I'm going to tighten this down all the way. It's really important that you have this tight. You do not want to leave this loose. If you do, you could have a carburetor leaking problem. So Nobody wants a leaky carburetor, so make sure you get it all the way tight. There we go. Okay, the next step is to put your gasket on. Do not forget to put your gasket on at this point. If you do forget to put your gasket on, you will be sorry because it has to go on before your float. The next step here is the needle. This needle, you can see it does have a groove here at the top, and it came with this clip, so it is designed to hang from the float. So I just put that around there like that, and I'm gonna put my thumb on the back side to hold it onto place, then drop it over the float, and then this just drops right down into the seat, and the pin goes across like this. The next thing you want to do is check the level of your float. So you can pick it up and hold it, and you want to make sure that your pontoons are straight across, and you can measure if you want to with a ruler. It should be somewhere around 1/4 inch from your pontoon to the face of the carburetor. But the most important thing is to make sure that they're straight and level. Sometimes you'll have them kind of bent off kilter, and that will cause, again, a leakage problem in your carburetor. And then also when you put your float pin in here, make sure that it's even on either side. Don't have it off to the side like this, or your two halves of the carburetor won't go together. So just make sure that that's placed evenly, and you'll be set there. I'm gonna gently hold this and flip it over. My last piece to go in up here is this idle adjustment screw. I'm gonna screw this down all the way until it bottoms out, and then come back out one turn. There's all the way down, and then I'm going to come back out one turn. This is going to be a great adjustment to start with. We can make final adjustments on the tractor, but that's a great place to start here on the bench. I should mention, in that top half, you should put your idle jet in place if you are replacing yours. Don't forget about that. I'm leaving mine alone, so I didn't even think to mention it, but as I get to the end, I have extra parts, so I got to mention that. Once you're to this point, the next thing to put in is this venturi. Now it is directional. Look at how I have it situated here. Some people will set them on the bottom half, and then when they put the two halves together, sandwich it. I personally prefer to work it underneath this gasket. You kind of got to be gentle with the gasket through here, but I like to set it in there and know that it's in place where it should be here. That's just my personal preference. Take it or leave it. Then once you have that set, you can go ahead and put the two halves of your carburetor together. You're setting this down ever so gently. You don't want to damage anything that, you know, like if the float had moved on you or anything like that, you don't want to damage anything. Line it up as carefully as you can, and then flip it over and put your 4 screws through the holes and tighten them up. I'm choosing to use a little bit of gas and oil resistant thread sealant on my fuel elbow with the strainer here, and you can do the same as well. I prefer that a little bit more than Teflon tape because you don't have to worry about which way the threads are headed. As stated before, it's really important that when you tighten up this elbow that you don't grab onto it in a way that would make this hole oblong. You want to protect the threads in perfect the way you want to protect them the way that they are. So just be careful when you turn it around here. I'm using a 9/16 wrench. Seems to fit on there really good. You want to tighten this up, and also think about the way that your fuel line is going to be orientated. My fuel line comes up from the bottom, so I want to end up with this towards the bottom so that it's ready to accept the fuel line. The next step is to put this main needle into place. Notice there's a gasket and a spring on the main needle. I'm going to put this in until it bottoms out, being careful not to overly tighten it because it can break off, but once it reaches the bottom, then I'll back out 2 turns, and that's going to be a good start for us. While we put it under the tractor, we can make adjustments if we need to. You can see that the top surface of my carburetor is all cleaned up. The remains of the old gasket are gone, so it'll be ready to accept this new gasket here. I did have on this side, there's a plug, and your kit does come with a new plug for the opposite side of your throttle shaft. So if you decide that you want to replace your plug, you can. Can you tell I got a new screwdriver? It's slippery. I should probably use this one that's got more grip on it. Won't drop it so much. Okay, I'm down to the bottom, so I'm coming back out 2 turns. Okay, that's 2 full turns. Got a new gasket here. If you have a spring like this in your kit, some carburetors need that for the choke return, so you can use it if you need it. But if you don't need it, if you have a different choke configuration, you can just discard that or recycle it. My carburetor is back on the tractor, so it's time to start it up and see how it runs. I'm listening to it idle. So you want to check a couple things when you start up your tractor. The first thing you want to make sure is that your carburetor isn't leaking. And then secondly, when it's running, you can listen to both the idle and the high speed. So I turn my tractor down to idle, and you can listen to the way that it idles and make sure that it's idling slow enough for you. And then for your high speed adjustment, you give it the gas, throttle it up, and then look at your smoke, also listen to it. Out the exhaust, if it's running too rich, your exhaust will be like black smoke, and you don't want that at all. So if your tractor is running too rich, you can make a fine-tune adjustment on the carburetor on that main adjustment needle. When you make an adjustment, just turn it a quarter of a turn at a time, not cranking on it. Little adjustments make a really big difference on your carburetor. So if you need to make those adjustments, you can, but most of the time that 1 turn and 2 turns that we do on the bench is just right for a new carburetor. I hope that this video is helpful to you and that you now have the confidence to rebuild your own carburetor. You can purchase carburetor kits on our website, farmtractorrepair.com. Also, like and subscribe to our channel. It helps us out, and it also gives you a notification every time a new video is released. We'll see you next time.